My name is Byf. Thank you for joining. I appreciate you. How are we doing today?
It's better than yesterday, I think, but at the same time, we'll keep things level for the time being, and we'll talk about what's in front of us factually. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And Nomad, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. On a personal level, I'm actually quite excited because I recently am starting school again, and my first day is tomorrow. So I've got a bit of a first day back at school vibes a little bit
Oh,
the night
wow.
before.
Nice.
Big
But yeah,
congrats on
no,
that, by the way.
thank you very much. In preparation for engineering, I thought, you know what, it'd be really nice if Bungie released 5 articles for me to read. So, and they did just that. So
Good
I'm
for
excited to
you.
talk about it. Thank you for having me on.
That's awesome. What interested you in engineering, really quick, before we get into it?
Well, little known fact about me, I actually went to school for physics.
Oh, cool. Right
And
on.
I quit that because my brain doesn't like quantum mechanics. Plus my teachers were less than helpful at the college that I went to. So for me, it's always been a bit of unfinished business, I'd say, like quitting university. Now I'm going back to it to kind of scratch that itch. But more than anything, I'm older now. I'm 32 years old, going to be
Yep.
33 in January. And there's an overwhelming desire to do something with my life that will lead to some sort of betterment of society. So as much as YouTube videos are important, I feel like, helping develop new technology and new ways of living is more important to
Absolutely.
everybody else.
Yep, absolutely. Well, congrats. That's an awesome next step. So I'm excited to see what you do with it.
Thank you.
Without further ado, I'm above. We'll be taking you through the journey ahead, kind of covering how we were feeling before the news that dropped today, and kind of doing a compare and contrast and a before and after of how we were feeling kind of post final shape. Obviously, we just came off of a huge high of Into the Light, which was, some arguably, I think, probably the best free content we've ever received in this game. From Onslaught and all the reprised weapons and shinies and multiple exotic missions coming back to eventually Pantheon, which in my opinion, it might just be my favorite activity ever, followed up by Final Shape. And now we're kind of in that post DLC inevitable lull without much, I guess, like information on the future, which I think has had a lot of people concerned. So heading into the first topic, prior to today's article, how are you guys feeling about D2's future, not only as a creator necessarily, but also as just like a fan of the franchise? Did you have higher levels of concern than you've had in the past? Has it made you contemplate potentially switching games as a creator or covering other things? Nomad, why don't we start with you?
Sure. As a fan, I think the biggest thing that I felt playing the Final Shape was that I wanted to play more of it. I got that one more game feeling. I got that, okay, maybe 20 minutes more, then I'll put it down. And I had the convenient excuse of being a content creator, which was really just a cover to say, I want to play Destiny for 13, 14 hours a day. Because it felt really, really good to play. And Prismatic was great. I loved the story. I loved just the Pale Heart, the environments, the music, the campaign. I loved all of it. And I consumed it voraciously. But when it came to the creation side of things, it was ultimately more of the same that we've been doing for the last sort of year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. It was that live service grind, got to cover all the stuff. In Byf's case, cover all the new lore and find out all the different threads to pull on. What is that story behind the story? For me, when it comes to loot, it was more of the same. Here's this gun. Is it good? Yes, no. But then you had the raid, which is really, really good. All of the elements of the Final Shape from a player perspective were fantastic. And it was the highest high that I think we've ever had from an expansion. Maybe comparable to Forsaken, comparable to The Taken King in terms of the highest highs.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest things that happened after all of that was done as a fan is that I got that feeling that happens when you complete a game. It's like, oh, it's done.
Mhm.
That was great. Fantastic. But that's it. And yes, there's other chases and stuff you can do. You can, subject yourself to the torture of exotic class items, which has gotten better since, but at the time it was really, 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 really bad. You could subject yourself to PvP. You could try and go for titles, and you could go for all the seals and everything like that, all those collectibles, which still haven't really changed. But I think everybody came into the final shape wanting to know how it ended. And once it ended and the raid was done and the 12-man mission came out, that was it. And then that's when we started to see people slowly but surely move on to other things. And then all of a sudden it seemed move on to everything. And then the layoffs happened. And then suddenly there was a huge exodus. So from a fan perspective, it has been a little disheartening to see such an amazing piece of content be bookended by bad studio news, first in January and now, in August. And as a creator, we're very reactive to how fans are feeling. So I don't think there's a single creator that I've talked to that isn't actively considering moving away from Destiny.
Yeah.
That's just been my personal experience. I know there are plenty of people who want to stick with the game and all that, but myself included, if the fans aren't feeling it, then who are we creating content for? Yeah. Really? Because we are effectively conduits for fan excitement. We're conduits for the interest of the fans. We are representative of our own communities. And if our own communities don't play the game, then what are we doing? So I have a lot of thoughts about all this, and I don't want to speak for too long in one term. I want to hear Byf's thoughts on this, but right now, definitely a lot of mixed emotions. But me personally, I'll be making one final video on Destiny and then moving on.
Oh, wow. Okay. Byf, how about you?
Not quite as dire in terms of the content situation, but I think I have to echo your point of sitting there and saying, if the fans aren't there, then who are we making content for? And there are definitely a lot of people who have, rightly hit that point where they feel that experience of, oh yeah, I finished this particular game and I'm okay with putting it down. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's put down forever, but for a lot of people, that might well be the case. I think that you hit the nail on the head, Nomad, when you discuss the fact that it is as crushing as it is to sit there and see one of the highest highs in Destiny's history bookended by, effectively, I'm pretty sure we're not allowed to use expletives, but I could use some colorful words to describe how we feel about the conduct of the executive team over at Bungie. Yeah. It's one of those really frustrating moments in Destiny's history, and as someone who has been here and who has been creating content around this game for 11 years, it is the most crushing low that it's ever been, and that's coming after another low that I would say was equally as crushing. I would sit there and say that maybe Lightfall was bad, but not as bad as some instances. It indicated that things could potentially go poorly, but yeah, the 2 rounds of layoffs, it's never been as bad as this. And it all comes after a great expansion, which is just the most painful part of it. We sat there and for 2 months, it really looked as though Destiny was in a really nice place where it had plateaued out, and the sentiment was really positive, and we might be able to go into the future with our heads held high and with the knowledge of, yes, this is a new era of Destiny. And the reality is that the narrative around a game like this becomes much harder to continuously maintain and to believe in the good future of if you sit there and see the studio having to close the doors of people that it's worked with. It's unbelievably frustrating. So as a fan, it's I don't know if there's ever been a lower low. Today's article, I mean, we'll talk about how everything feels after the article. It does not, spoiler alert, I don't think it makes an enormous amount of change, even if it does move the needle a little for some. Yeah. But it is still one of those things where, as a Destiny fan, I don't even know if I'm disappointed. I am actually still kind of resentful, and there's almost anger, but I think it's important to understand that it's pointed in a certain direction, Yeah. We are no longer in this place where we are ignorant to the idea of Bungie being just, this massive company. Like, no, we know who to point the finger of blame at. We know who is to blame for all of this. And I think that's the really strange experience is this time around with all of the anger, everyone is sitting there and it seems like the players and most of the developers are on the same side with everything, which you don't always see. It tends to be this thing of, Bungie, why'd you do this? And that's not what's happening this time. So it's markedly different. From the creation side of things, though, I mean, I'm in a weird place, as I think most lore content creators are, because people's interest in the lore of a game is directly tied to whether that game is interesting, for one, which Destiny, I think you could make the argument, it has interesting lore. Otherwise I wouldn't have a channel with 1 million subscribers. Let's get that out of the way, because there's a lot of people that would love to go ahead and hate. I know, right? But point being, there's a lot of people who sit there and be like, no one cares. And, that speaks to deeper problems with things. The other point, and the reason why people don't care, is because there is a perception that there's no future for Destiny, or at very least this is what it felt like prior to the article. And the good news is they've sat there and confirmed, yes, there is another multi-year saga. But as a content creator, I could feel the effects of people not seeing a future for Bungie from the moment the layoffs happened. There are my videos pre-layoffs, and there are my videos post-layoffs. Pre-layoffs, you know, things were going back down to their normal levels of viewership, which is exactly what I expected. You know, videos would tend to peak at somewhere close to 100,000 views. And it sounds crazy to measure it by this statistic, but genuinely, for creators, sometimes this is how you have to look at things, because it's a direct measure of your audience engagement.
Yeah.
Right? And post-layoffs, it has just fallen off a cliff. And I think that it's telling for me as a lore creator in particular, because why do people look at the lore of something? They look at the lore so they can understand the context, so that they know what they're getting into when they next roll up into the game and another expansion or another update that takes you to a new place. You don't care about what's going on in Witch Queen if you know nothing about the Hive. But the moment you learn about Savathun and the fact that she's a god of trickery and that she's a pretty big deal, and that Oryx guy you killed years ago, yeah, it turns out that, you know, they're siblings. It's at that point where you sit there and it's like, oh yeah, I want to engage with this content. This matters. And people not engaging with my content is not, I mean, obviously it's concerning to me, but it tells me a bigger story about where the game is, which is that people aren't willing to engage with the future of it because they don't see it. This news hopefully changes some of that, but it doesn't change the fact that some people have put it down, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
And they may not necessarily be coming back.
And I think there's interesting points that you both bring up. And one was that really resonated with me was, you know, post Lightfall leading into another major expansion, we have a delay heading into Final Shape. And there's a wave of layoffs. And we're like, okay, this is obviously a horrible situation. But, you know, it's coming off of the, you know, the revenue reports of like just huge misses on their projections. And so like from a financial standpoint, you're like, I mean, maybe the studio's just in a really tough spot. Obviously, you know, we were still very frustrated at, you know, the leadership and how somehow, you know, none of the leadership positions are losing their jobs, but we're losing, you know, Michael Salvatore and community managers and people that were really influential on the game that we love. And then, you know, fast forward 6 months, there's an excellent expansion, and the same consequences come from whether you deliver an expansion that's not well received or something that is reviewed 9s and 10s across the board from all major media outlets, that is, you know, has pretty much just blown the community away in terms of not only the, you know, the campaign content, but the raid, everything that came along with it, into the light with Onslaught and Pantheon. And it was like, to me, it was one of the peak moments in Destiny where I felt like for such an extended period of time, in such a game that has its natural ups and downs, you know, over the course of several years, like it's so easy to go from the highest highs to the lowest lows in a relatively short time frame. But this was like one of the first times in a long time we'd had a sustained level of engagement from the community that honestly I hadn't seen before. And to see it fall off so sharply after Final Shape, I think speaks to one, you know, maybe they didn't have the most fleshed out plan of what they wanted to do post Light and Dark Saga, especially for a franchise that literally carries their studio's revenue. Obviously they're working on Marathon, and now, you know, they've had a mobile game and development for Destiny and things like that will you know, hopefully do well for them. But you know, it was just such a breaking point for so many people. And to your point as well, Byf, people saying how, you know, it's reflected on the creator, like what the viewership is like. I mean, it's true. There's days I stream Destiny and people are like, really? You're streaming Destiny today? Like, instead of, you know, there's just so many games that are out right now, and I had never really had that before, you know, where...
And to be clear, this is our main game. This is our bread and butter. This is what our viewership on an average day is looking at.
Yeah.
Like, not in a case of necessarily is explicitly excited for, but they're subscribed to us for that reason, for that content.
Yep. Just, I don't know, just wild. And, I don't know. It's a confusing time to be a creator, because I want to have faith in the studio and support the folks that still work there, but I I do at the same time have that sense of like anger and disappointment in the leadership side, and that nothing's been done, you know, in the way that, you know, leadership has managed things. And I don't know, just it's a strange time. And, you know, as a fan, like I definitely, and I think I saw MacDix say this, is it's a feeling of, it's just, I'm kind of apathetic towards the game, because until today, when we got, you know, future plans, like, it's like, what are you really playing for at this point? You know, we've always had a raid to look forward to. There's always been a dungeon to look forward to. And, you know, until the blog post today, which if anybody in chat has not yet read through it, you can do !blog in chat and pull up the entire article yourself if you guys want to do a more in-depth read. But yeah, I mean, for months, it's now, I mean, how far, we're what, 3 months post Final Shape release, and we're just now hearing about, you know, where they plan to take the game. And 3 months is basically an eternity for a live service game to wait to give any sort of direction to their audience about where the future of the game is going. And
I mean, in fairness, they were throwing a really big curveball after a month.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean,
and
that felt very premeditated. Like the speed of which the layoffs happened, the timing of the layoffs, it felt like it was a business decision, and they were waiting for the initial numbers to come in to pull the trigger.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like it felt very calculated and cold, because there's no good reason otherwise, unless the delineation between game and business is so huge, and they're doing a really good job of covering it up to the point where we don't know the true story happening at Bungie, which is fair enough. Like, we don't really have that inside. We just get snippets and we piece it all together to the best of our ability. But yeah, I think just the layoffs being the timing of that was just incredibly shocking, and it had to be a cold decision from the top. It had to be.
Yeah.
But I agree. I think there should have been a layout. I think there should have been a roadmap released right after we killed the witness, to be honest with you. Like, it should have happened sooner.
It's just
because
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Like sorry, I'll just finish my point.
Go for it.
One of the biggest issues I had with the Final Shape was like, okay, this is our endgame moment. I mean, we had that cutscene in the campaign that was pulled straight from Avengers Endgame, you know, with everybody coming in. And then we had that moment, and it was glorious. And then we had Avengers or MCU after Endgame too, where we didn't really know what's happening. We'd like, okay, here's a Spider-Man film that'll tide you over. Yay. But that sort of lack of direction was always clear from the outset. There wasn't anything planned. But it's also hard because you can't plan anything in front of it in advance, because then that would diminish from the story you're trying to tell with the witness. So it definitely feels like they put every egg in their basket to make the Final Shape bang, and they just said screw it and let just plan for the future through vibes. That's what it feels like.
We'll worry about that when we get there, sort of situation.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I can't. If I might really quickly jump on that, I have to echo what you just said, because it's spot on for just a second, Nomad. Yes, it's astounding to me that we didn't see something pointing towards the fact that this blog post would get released, right? You know, like we had the Frontiers like devlog that dropped, where it's like, you know, the journey ahead, it revealed more about the episodes. Cool, whatever. Give us a countdown to the 10th anniversary or something, anything. Yeah. Yep. Like, or just release it earlier. And I know that's so easy to say, and it's not very easy to necessarily do. You know, two different things, whatever. Yeah, sure, absolutely. But God, it feels like the most completely avoidable fumble on that end of things. You know,
it really does.
They should have seen that this was going to be an Infinity War moment, and there was going to be the book ending to the franchise. And it's crazy to me that we didn't see an immediate follow up on this. Like, when Empyrean Foundation was done, and when we finally reached the top of that thing, they immediately announced that Trials was returning. Should have been that cadence, you know, should have been that same degree of speed, should have been, yep, okay, you beat the witness, here's what comes next, you know?
Yep, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, clearly it's had a huge impact on player population. You know, there have been multiple articles written about, you know, D2 reaching all-time lows on Steam, and I'm not trying to make this, and I don't think it's any of our points to make this like overly negative towards Bungie. It's just kind of like a reality check on where are we at post Final Shape after what was genuinely like such a great time for the game for like 6+ months. So I think the next question, as we kind of transition, goes into Did the Frontiers blog post change any of that sentiment for you? So the things you guys discussed, kind of the blog post looking forward, is there anything specifically in there that has you extremely excited about the future, that gives you more ease or like a willingness to log back into the game and grind more consistently, or did it not really move the needle for you? And this is open to either of you.
And I quote something from my that I tweeted earlier.
Sure.
Go right ahead.
It was a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I still stand by this. I said, basically, I'm very much in camp wait and see, because it's really hard to get excited by text on a screen. It always has been. And as we've seen, future plans may or may not change depending on whether or not Pete wants a new classic car. Which, you know, I understand the man. He has great taste. And I don't think anybody's pointed this out. Pete Parson has great taste in classic cars. Like, as a petrol head, gearhead, whatever you want to call it, props. But obviously it's coming at the expense of, you know, everyone we love. So not good. Anyways, with respect to the Frontiers, like it is just blog posts. The only concrete thing we had shown was the concept art, which we're going to geek out about, or Byf's going to geek out about.
Yep.
And but concept art by its very nature is just a proof of concept. It's subject to change. It's only hints and ideas and emotions. It's not, this is what's happening and this is where we're moving. It's sort of like we're going to shine the flashlight in that direction, see what shows up. That's what concept art is supposed to do.
Yep.
And whilst that's really, really cool, and what we've seen is cool, we haven't seen anything else concrete. We've seen a bunch of development screens that, okay, look nice, but what it seems like they're doing is they're streamlining what is already there in Destiny, and from what they've described with the systems with respect to the portal and the new core game modes and all the way they're organizing everything, I think that's needed to be done 5 years ago. And that's great. I'm glad they're doing it. Glad it's finally being addressed. Glad that they're trying to make the game friendly to new people and to new players. But I don't think that's going to be enough for the existing player base. Remember also that Final Shape sold less than Lightfall, which means that Final Shape didn't attract any new players at all. It's all existing players. And the existing players probably have a decent amount of hours with the game, so they're not going to necessarily be excited about UI updates. You know, so we need to, like, until we see more details about what the story is going to be. I know they said something about non-linear storytelling, which is great, but it's also very risky. Unless they give us concrete, you know, who's the big bad, what's the story, what's this world, what are you going to promise us in terms of loot? Is it going to be the same sort of grind for adepts thing, or are we going to have more experiential gameplay? What's going on here? If it's more Destiny, then people are going to not tune in. But if it's something new, something different, something that could feasibly have been marketed as a sequel, then I think people will get excited about it.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll be diving into a few screenshots from the actual presentation itself today, but I don't know, to me it kind of felt very early development, almost like you said, concept arts and like very rough outlines of like what they're hoping to achieve, which is kind of bizarre to me. And it leads me to another point that I've talked about a lot in stream, and I'd be interested to see if you guys feel like this could be the case. But with the Final Shape delay and how low the community sentiment was when they pulled, or I guess when they brought Into the Light as like a free drop to kind of win back community trust, which, to your point, Nomad, apparently didn't do all that much, seeing that it actually sold less than Lightfall, and now you know, community trust is even lower. It's interesting because to me it feels like a lot of Into the Light's content was developed for this first episode as something to fill the gap before this announcement, and it just feels like in my gut like that was pulled forward to sustain players before Final Shape because they really needed to sell that DLC. Maybe in, you know, with knowing that people could be laid off, and so they wanted to deliver big before to get people reinvested in the game. And now that's led to this huge lull post Final Shape where it just is so samey to the previous seasonal model that we've already had. Like, episodes have not done anything for me to change the formula or get me more invested in the way that, you know, you play Destiny on a week-to-week basis. Granted, the story is actually pretty good. Like, I've been enjoying the story.
And this is what I've got to jump in on this real quick, because this is the most frustrating thing. There are so many people I see on a regular basis who will sit there and parrot off the point of story is ass. It's not the story is ass, it's that you don't care. It's because the game is not engaging you. The story is good. It's just, it's not coming to you in a way that is engaging. It is not being delivered in a manner that you will engage with, because it's not the content, it's the vehicle, right?
Yeah,
that's the key thing. We are getting a story about like body horror nonsense we've never seen in Destiny before. So sorry to cut you off, Nomad, but like these are terrifying concepts, and like exploring them through an interesting character lens. But it's about the way you have to get it week by week. It's about the fact that it's all through those same radio messages. That's like formulaic. You know, it is predictable in its cadence, and that's a problem. You know,
and it's time gated.
I was just going to add to the point. It's just that you have to consider the environment in which the story is being released. It's sort of like it's sort of like the people who called Concord a bad game. It wasn't fundamentally a bad game. It just was not wrapped up well, is the most polite way I can describe it. And, you know, the lack of marketing and all that. Like, there hasn't been too much marketing for Echoes either. Like, there hasn't been a big push to get people in the game from the social channels. Maybe because they laid off all the people doing that, but like, but still, like, there hasn't been that same hype and that same excitement. They've been trying, but you know,
I've got to echo you here again, man. Like, this is the most important point that is somewhat understated even in the blog post, and I hope that it gets picked up on big by the community, which is simply, we need new blood. Like, yes, attracting back the old guard is going to be important, and it's going to be a battle that will take a long time, and it will be a big uphill struggle for the rest of Destiny's life cycle until there is a Destiny 3, if there is ever a Destiny 3, which is still a little up in the air. But right now, we need new blood desperately. Like, if you're going to sit there and continue this franchise, there is only so much you can rely on the old guard, and that means we need new players in here. It's just, it's as simple as that. Like, it's not been given enough focus for years, and now it's really got to a boiling point where it needs to be focused on quite desperately. Get people in the game again, revisit New Light, or whatever the new player experience is called now. Make sure that you are actually onboarding these people with tutorials that are effective. Hold their hands, introduce them to the weird verbiage and cadence. Show them the best parts of Destiny up front. You know, show them why they should be playing the game and why they should be sticking around. Revisit that entire section of the game, and please make it effective, because it's slowly strangling the player population, and it doesn't look like it is because it's just been there in the background and quote unquote doing its thing, but it's not been doing it well enough. If it had been doing its thing well, we would see continual uptick in players coming to the game and new community members on a regular basis. Don't, you know, I feel like the community shrinks.
I have a very hot take for that.
Do tell.
If Destiny 2 had fixed every possible thing that they could have, let's say they fixed difficulty, they fixed PvP, they fixed parallel, they fixed the loot, they made it let's say it was a perfect game, they still would have sold less than Lightfall, because it's Destiny 2. And at this point, it's still a known quantity in the eyes of the average consumer. You either play Destiny 2 or you don't. Free to play was probably the biggest thing they did for the game's population. And, you know, it did boost the game's population. They did a huge marketing push with Lightfall, boost the game's population. The final shape, I don't think I saw as much marketing around the final shape as I did with Lightfall. But that's just my personal perspective. I could be very, very wrong. Feel free to correct me on that. But the point really, one of the reasons why people call for Destiny 3 is not because they're being petty or ignorant or they're, you know, just being gamers with capital G's on the internet. It's because a sequel generates a huge amount of hype. And I know realistically, it would take years before they could release a product that not only was good enough technically to fulfill the requirements of being a sequel, but also be a sequel in spirit and in nature, where the game systems have evolved and one up the previous ones. But at this point, that is what is going to save the population. But truthfully, if we're going to be focused on the population, we're not going to, nobody, not Bungie, not us, not somebody on Reddit, nobody's going to find a solution for player population, because the biggest thing dragging it down is that Destiny 2 badge. the best thing Destiny 2 can do right now is make a really good game that's fun to play, and word of mouth will do the rest. Yeah. That's the only way to salvage what's left.
And it's interesting because, you know, when they announced the mobile game, what was it? Not announced it, but yeah, we kind of knew something was in the works with NetEase that had been funding them for, I think, like had funded them like 3 or 4 years prior. Where we had heard about that through like, you know, news sources and things like that, but like not Destiny 3, and everybody was like, dude, are you kidding me? Like, who is asking for this? And I understand that it does like help fund the studio and things like that, and mobile games make a lot of money. My concern with like the lack of Destiny 3 now is if it's not already been in development for 2 to 3 years, it is so far out that the likelihood of that getting developed in a time where it would still be relevant to anybody that plays this franchise, I'm not sure it would. I mean, it's gonna take 3-4 years of development most likely to
minimum.
I mean, they would have had to be years into development at this point, alongside doing Final Shape. And I think if they
probably
were
at
actually
that point doing Lightfall and Witch Queen, considering the timeline that we're talking about there, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I feel like if it's not already in development, I do think it would fix a lot of fundamental issues with the game. I think, like you said, I think a lot of people were like, "Oh, well, D2's in a terrible state. Why would D3 be any better?" And it's just what you said. It's people buy into the hype and the hope of something new being better than its predecessor, and the whole idea is, one, their marketing teams are some of the best in all of the gaming industry, bar none. They can hype people up to buy an expansion, but also, I don't know, there's just a lot of fundamental issues that we'll talk on later, and I'll touch on because I didn't see them addressed in the blog post today, but that I genuinely do think can only be solved with a new title, because there's just a lot of factors at play in terms of, you know, the varied loot pool and prismatic and things of that nature that just make it, I don't know, to me, some of the elements of the end game have become very formulaic, very rigid, and a lot of the, I guess, like experimentation that you would have in D1 or like even the early days of D2 has kind of been taken away, because like things like prismatic and certain weapons are just so much better than everything else that it's like, what's the point of me using the 3.0 subclasses, or what's, you know, like the other 3.0s, or like what's the point of me using these weapons when I could use a rocket sidearm that one-shots everything and heals me every time? Like, I mean, it's just, I don't know. There's a lot of fundamental issues with this game that I think would greatly benefit from a third title. With that said, I want to transition to the next talking point, which is kind of the timeline of the Frontiers. So now that we've kind of set the stage for how we're feeling right now, diving into a little bit of the Frontiers, we're getting 2 annual expansions per year. So one coming in summer of 2025, which is, I mean, it could be as early as 9 months from now, which would be 1 year post Final Shape. And then Behemoth winter of 2025. So they're going back to more of like a 2, I don't know if you would call it a major expansion, but like, you know, more moderate sized expansions, maybe closer to Warmind or something of that nature. We don't really have many details yet, but they do note that it will contain new stories, locations, missions, weapons, gear, raids, and dungeons. And to me, the focus point on the raid specifically was a big deal for me, because we weren't sure if raids would continue to be something that the Destiny community or that the Destiny team still worked on. We're in this seasonal model where dungeons have become relatively expected content, I think, and same thing with like exotic missions, but the raids, those are obviously such a big undertaking, and with them losing such a huge portion of their team, like I know a couple people from the raid team actually were let go. It's good to see that we actually have confirmation of those coming again. And I think that motivates a lot of players, at least, you know, endgame PvE players like myself, to continue to play this game and want to farm for gear, even during the slow points of the game. They're going to have seasonal updates, reward passes, things of that nature, all pretty bog standard, I think. Is there anything here that stood out to either of you guys? Maybe Byf, will have you start on this one.
I've got to be completely honest. If there's anything that stands out to me, and I'll be completely honest, I don't think there's anything that moves the needle for me until we get more details. That's just the general overview. The big thing that stands out to me is the 2 expansions a year format, which, oh my gosh, I know people have a rose-tinted view of Warmind, and lots of people enjoy it, but I need people to remember at the time Warmind and Curse of Osiris were miserable. Like,
They were.
oh, people do not remember how bad that was. Like, yeah, people are going to look back on it quite handily, but you look happily back on Escalation Protocol and the Ikelos shotgun. I look back on that and I think to myself, oh God, that was the most existential dread I've had as a content creator up until this point. So really, like, you know, like let's not sugarcoat this. If this turns into a Curse of Osiris Warmind situation, it's really bad. But that being said, I think the definition of what an expansion has changed a lot in recent years. And I also think that the Bungie team is more experienced at delivering more content and better content on a regular basis. So I have hope, and I really do think that there is the possibility that this ends up being a decent shift, because I think that there is a certain point at which cadence is the more important thing than, creating one massive watershed moment. It creates this engaged flow with a game rather than just having one big moment where everything comes along. And if everyone is engaged consistently with the flow, maybe that works. But it is a big gamble. And again, I fear the looming specter of Curse of Osiris and Warmind, because I also fear the looming specter of the Dark Below, and I guess less so House of Wolves. It's
I don't
stands
think
out
we're
to
going
me
to go.
as kind of terrifying.
I don't think we're going to go back to those lows because we actually seem to have a narrative director who knows what they're doing.
Oh, thank goodness. Yes.
Unlike those expansions where it was just kind of vibes and prayers.
Vibes
Also,
and prayers
just to
and
add,
like 8 weeks to actually make each expansion, which, oh god, poor Destiny 1 team at that time.
Yeah. Also, just to add to your PTSD as well, those shaders were consumable.
Oh my god, that's right.
Oh,
I
no.
forgot about that.
Oh no.
Oh my god. Wild.
Anyways, no, I'm in full agreement with Byf. I'm very much wait and see. Medium-sized expansions, it's interesting they didn't directly draw comparison to a previous expansion.
Mhm.
To me, a medium-sized expansion feels like Shadowkeep, if anything. But I know that had a campaign,
Yeah.
a raid, and other things. But it was like the campaign for Shadowkeep was all on the moon, and it was all like strikes turned into missions and shit. Like, I don't know. We don't know what that means. But
Yeah.
hey, at least we have we've gone back to updates every 3 months, which is good.
We're also back to, we have some sort of future for the game that isn't just episodes or like seasonal content. So
yeah, rip episodes, by the way. F in the chat.
Yeah, dang it. So anyways, so the I'm very much in favor of the 2 expansions, the non-linear story. I think the more activities they can give us, which I think they said they're kind of leaning that direction of more unique experiences like Onslaught or like Pantheon, things like that, where they really shake up like what you're doing in the game and what your focus is for that season. It was the same thing with Escalation Protocol, just like those unique experiences that people all remember, Prison of Elders, whatever it is. Like just having a time-gated formulaic seasonal model and then like an exotic mission here, and then you're like, okay, well I wait 3 months and then there's a dungeon, and like that's cool for a week, and then you're like, okay, well I got everything, so now what? I don't know. I do have a bit of hope. Obviously this is not everything I want to see. I think there's some fundamental issues with the game, and you know, I do think this is a start, and I at least do feel at least a bit of a relief from what we knew yesterday, which was literally nothing. So it is good to at least have some sort of confirmation of the future. But
do you know what it feels like? It feels like we're just standing around in the dark and we're all looking at each other saying, where are we going? And then somebody stands up and finally goes, this way. And then that's it.
Yep.
That's what this felt like more than anything else.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
We're going there, guys. Follow me. So,
and they use the term new a lot, and like we're you know, big buzzwords like non-linear a lot and things like that, which like it's a cool concept, and I'm open to it, but it's definitely a wait and see. This is
the other thing about all this too, right?
Sure,
if I'm
go
going to
ahead.
just jump in, we in this community, Destiny players generally, have been around. We have been all over this franchise for the last 10 years. And there have been a lot of times when we have been told something is going to happen and it's not necessarily panned out. Words don't necessarily mean that much anymore. It needs to turn into action. To give you the latest example that popped into my head was the promise that episodes would be a shake-up of the stuff we'd had with the seasonal model. And I mean, Mylin, God bless him, was there on week 1, you know, ringing the bell and being the town crier and saying, no, this is the same. Nothing has changed here, guys. Like,
wait, Byf, hang on. Sorry to interrupt you. Do you guys hear that?
I do. You have a little bit of static coming through.
No, it's not that. It sounds like renewed focus on PvP.
Oh, that sound. Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear anything.
No, that's
okay. But yeah, no, you perfectly proved my point. Like, talk is cheap, you know. If we're gonna sit there and actually see changes like this, it's very nice to sit there and hear that we're doing these things, and that's great, and I'm all for it. But please show us, like, please get us there. Please follow up with action, because right now the community is in desperate need of actually seeing stuff. It's why I think that there's a very muted degree of excitement around these blog posts. It's because Bungie, and this is completely within their wheelhouse, you know, the narrative team and everyone who's actually developing the expansions, they don't want to sit there and spoil anything just yet. You know, they want to get there when we get there, because it'll take time for the story to unfold from Revenant and Heresy as it does. So kudos to them. Like, fair enough. That's a completely legitimate reason to not show too much.
Yeah.
But like, until we see the actual changes in front of us and until we see what's going on, it's very hard to get excited about all of this, which is not to say that it won't be good, because, I mean, it's one of those things of we can't judge it until we have it in our hands. But it's also one of those moments where we've got to acknowledge that perception is important here too, you know? For many gamers, that's the reason why the layoffs were so devastating. None of them lost their jobs, but the perception was, oh my God, Bungie is toast. Bungie's cooked. It's Jova, you know? And that's what rules this. So if we don't have any information to go off of, it's very hard to be proactively excited or engaged with something like this.
Well, and it's also tough because, you know, normally leading up to an expansion, they have that power to keep things close to the vest and kind of, you know, wait and see of like this story arc is going to be insane, and you know, you have motivation to really go and play through it. A lot of people just don't have any motivation to start a whole new saga post Final Shape, Light and Dark Saga. Like, so like this whole episode, people are pretty disinterested. Good. Yeah, it could be the best story in the world, and it is solid. Like I've actually enjoyed some of the story beats, but like asking players to log in to something where they have very little knowledge about the future, to play through time-gated content towards this next big, you know, moment in the Destiny timeline is a pretty big ask. And I hope that they have some sort of catch-up mechanic for that type of story for players who, like, to be honest, are fairly disinterested right now. And going back to a point earlier as well, something I wanted to talk about was the new player experience that you guys were talking about, of how New Light is just they've tried to revamp it a couple times. I would still consider it about as bare bones as you could possibly accept from a AAA studio, to be honest. I think it does very little to actually get you into the world of Destiny, especially since we're missing campaigns and things that like kind of set the stage for like why the tower's on fire and why the Cabal hate us, but now they all of a sudden are our allies. And like, you know, we have none of that in the game itself. They've done a good job with like the timeline that they've kind of brought into the game, but I don't feel like they do enough to direct players the very early onset of Into the Light. And they've made some strides in kind of that once you're somewhat into the game, they've helped you by, for example, Fire team scaling power is super helpful so that you can play with your friends. If they do happen to somehow get past the end of the light or the new light experience and like actually get on board with Destiny and want to play with friends who have been playing for a while, the fire team scaling is great. Being able to pull gear from your collections at, 1990 power or whatever is a great change as well. Like they've definitely made some strides, but I feel like they're still missing that very early simplicity, which like this screenshot here definitely seems like they're aware of that and they're trying to make some changes to make it more digestible for players who are diving into Destiny for the first time. You have a solo playlist, fire teams, pinnacle activities, crucible, and then events like Solstice of Heroes or things like that, tower, and then if you want to pan over to destinations, you can do that. That's great. So it seems like they're at least making an effort, but they're still they desperately need to revamp the new
I was
light
just gonna say it's just, even if you are a new light player, and I know this is a dev screenshot and I know this is all talk for the sake of talk, but even if you're a new light player, you see this, what the hell is all this? What does it even mean? What is Crucible? What is Tower? What is Fire Team Ops? I'm just reminded of, like, because I got the opportunity to play the War Within recently, World of Warcraft. I think you did as well.
I did.
The two of you. And the first thing you get pulled into, which nobody told me about.
Actually did not, but hey, not to cut onto your point.
Listen, you'll get your big break one day, Byf. It's okay. Anyways.
It's okay. It's fine.
Anyways, the first thing they do without warning, and nobody told me this, is they put you into tutorials like, hey, this is how this game works. Deal with it. And you can't access anything else outside of that until you finish it.
Yep.
And I don't know if there is that or if it's sufficient enough to explain what's going on. I know there's a Shoal Han thing quest, but is that good enough?
They teach you how to pick up bounties, I'm pretty sure, for all the bounty orders out there, and follow a quest in your inventory. And then they're like, all right, good luck. You did great.
So
good luck out there.
I'm going to throw this out there based on last few years of experience. In the last 2 years, my wife got back into playing D2 alongside so that we could do some more stuff together and just chill out. Mm-hmm. And I got to watch her go through the opening experience of the game again, and oh wow, it's still not good. And that may be 2 years ago, and it may have been since there's been another update, but yeah, it's really not good. There is a lot that gets thrown at people. A lot of the UI is not intuitive. It's not very user-friendly. Yep. And the way that this is one small gripe I personally have, which is maddening to me. The way that Bungie does a lot of its directed tutorials, it's just pop-ups at the bottom of your screen that you can accidentally dismiss. Mm-hmm. Or alternatively, which you just want to have go away because you might be doing something else, and there's no direction to it. There's no voicing. There is no... It feels like a reminder. It's not something that's trying to teach you actively.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like one of the bumpers that appears as you're loading into a zone down beneath your ships. It is not effective at what it's trying to do, and they need to completely revamp that system in order to make it work. Practically none of the tutorials are voiced, as best I know. There may be no tutorials that are voiced.
Visually speaking, we've all been conditioned to accept that lower third is optional. Like, it's optional information. Our weapon statuses 100%. Are down there. Our subtitles are always down there. It's like, if you want people's attention, you need to put it bright and center in the middle of the screen or somewhere close to the top of the screen, because that's where people's eyes are most of the time. Yep. When you're watching or consuming any sort of visual media, lower third is sort of like, okay, here's some other things here just in case. You do not put mission critical stuff in the lower third ever. Sorry, this is just my inner filmmaker coming out. This was drilled into us at school.
Do you think, I mean, honestly, where a good spot for a revamped New Light experience would be? Destiny 3. So,
wow.
Anyways,
he said it. He said it.
Wow.
Chat, he said
the thing. Dude, no, my chat knows that I don't like to read things in games. Is there...
Don't you make guides, motherfucker?
I do, but they're visual, man. Listen.
I'm just going to throw this out there because it would be mandatory otherwise. Bane of my existence. can't read.
Yeah.
Story things, mad. Anyway,
It's,
yeah.
it's like that meme. This would make them mad if they could read, or whatever.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
No, in all seriousness, I think it does need a huge revamp. And I was curious, have you guys played any games? You mentioned the War Within expansion. Are there any other games that like come to mind that have had a really good like introduction to the game of like how to play? Either it could be live service or even just like a single player experience of like something that really stands out to either of you guys.
Yes, Bastion. Okay, very old game by this point in time, but if you've ever played a Supergiant game, you remember Bastion. Go back and play it. It's brilliant. They integrate the tutorial perfectly into the story. They make it seem completely natural. They don't disrupt the flow. As you go through and discover elements, you will hear more of it, and it's completely within the style of things. I can't even discuss what it does, but I'll say that it's to do with the narrator and the fact that your story is always being talked about at that exact moment. It is always there. It's giving you context on the world you're jumping into, and it's also giving you context on what you're doing in the game. You know, like it's the perfect tutorial in my mind. It doesn't help for Destiny because yeah, there's no easy way to jump in and directly transfer a bunch of that, but having something that is interactive with the player and what they're doing is probably the best way of engaging with a tutorial. That's the takeaway I'd say from it. You know,
Well,
if you're sitting there and seeing the player getting low on ammo, you know, maybe have Cade notice that, and in the background he sits there and chorps into your head and is like, hey, so, you know, you might want to go ahead and reload that thing. You can't shoot without any bullets. Of course, not Cade, like whatever. You get my point. If this was a revisiting of D1, if this was something that involved him, it doesn't need to be him. Just any character. Doesn't matter.
Yep.
For me, because I was on a bit of a classic game spree, and I feel so old calling this a classic game. Grand Theft Auto 4.
Okay.
Like it teaches you the mechanics of the game, how the game works, how the game plays through the narrative. It's designed, the early bit of the game is just solely designed to get you to grips with the game. The scale of Grand Theft Auto, as we all know, is huge, but you start off in one corner of the map and you do all the things in that corner, to the point where that chapter of the narrative is just reaches a conclusion at the same point that all the gameplay mechanics and all the things you need to know about the game also reaches a conclusion. So I think that's very, very well paced. I've always been a big fan of the way GTA starts their games, because we know we've created this super massive world that you're going to spend thousands of hours into. There's no need to see it all at once. Here, just do the things on this part of the map, and then when you're ready, we'll give you the rest of it.
Yeah, so a couple ones from chat that were brought up were First Ascendant apparently is a decent one, and Lost Ark's new introduction's pretty good apparently. I would say the one that stood out to me recently, I played Once Human, and they have a pretty good tutorial / starter area that like really gets you kind of introduced to how the game plays and like what you should be focused on. Not that they're like industry leading examples or anything, but like I don't know, I feel like there are definitely really good ways out there that narrators, like you said, just go such a long way. It's like that added bit of context, because a lot of people they're not, they don't like to sit through and read a bunch of tutorials. Like they learn by doing, and so having someone kind of like talking you through what to do is such a big thing. So I hope this screenshot here is like, you know, the start of something along those lines of just simplification, because even for Destiny vets like myself, like the map is so cluttered with stuff to do. There's so many quest tabs, exotic quests, you know, the seasonal quests versus, you know, just, I don't know. There's so much going on. I think everybody could use kind of a reset in that area. So I'm excited to see they're at least doing something along that line. And then this was interesting. So this is also pulled from the post today. This is, I guess, selectable, scalable difficulty, kind of customizing how difficult an activity can be, and then amplifying the rewards based on the difficulty that you select, which seems pretty cool, all things considered. So I'll remove myself for a second. But so it seems like they have things from rules, gameplay, enemy power, and then it seems like they're bringing back the scoring system as well, and then they have a difficulty level associated to it. So there's a lot to unpack here. It does seem like they're trying to add a bit more depth and customization to PvE, especially for players who a lot of people complain like there just isn't, like, especially post Prismatic introduction. People are like, oh, it's just, you know, this game is so easy. Like, we're running over Grandmasters in 9 minutes that used to take us like 20 back in the day before we, you know, we could just consecration everything to death in a GM. And so to me, this is exciting. This is the kind of innovation I want to see them kind of expand on, because like coming from that WoW experience, one of the things that I kind of picked up on, Nomad, I'm not sure how much of like the dungeons stuff you ended up running, but they have so many variable difficulties of not only like raids but just different activities. And depending on that, like, you know, you can really ramp it up. There's things that you could do solo, there's things that you could do at a team, and they kind of modify the mechanics based on how many people are in your fire team. So I don't know, I would love to see more stuff like this in Destiny. I think this is a really good step forward. This is one of the things I'm actually excited about. Be interesting to see how it actually plays out, but I thought this was something really cool. And then they also are upgrading weapons even further, it looks like, up to tier 5. We don't know what the system fully means just yet, but basically a more robust, in-depth weapon upgrade system. And they're pairing this with a reduction in crafting as well. So they said, our intent is to for crafting going forward is to provide a catch-up mechanism for roles you weren't able to nab from its original sources. This may be because the source is no longer available or was gated by lockouts when it was, but ultimately we want crafting to support the weapon chase, not replace it. We'll follow up with more details in a future article. I'd be interested to get your guys' take on any of these 3 elements of the game being added.
Oh god, someone call Datto and tell him the news about crafting if he hasn't heard already. Yeah, I think that's probably the most positive side effect of it, as long as they actually pair it with a consistent loot game that gives you stuff with a reasonable expectation. You know, it's been the major reason, you know, like people have sat there and not decided to do endgame content and have disengaged from the game because the chase is no longer there with crafting. Yep. I think crafting being for raid weapons was you know, it seems like a great choice in hindsight, but oh god, it's really screwed around with a whole load of it. It killed a lot of people's desire to do a bunch of content. So yeah, I don't know what to say on that side of things other than if they are committing to this, I think it's the right direction, and that yes, this is what crafting should have been, supporting the chase, not replacing it.
Yep.
So I'll just say, as somebody who's made loot videos for the last 2 years, really good across the board. I like that they're defocusing crafting. That has killed replayability. That's undeniable at this point. I think crafting was a good response to the crazy amounts of RNG with respect to so many different weapons that were all really good at the time. But at the same time, it did expose the very real thing that, you know, people stopped raiding once they got the patterns. It just unfortunate that's what happened. Most people spend more time in GMs, and because you couldn't craft those weapons. The tiered structure also very good. I like that. That's the sort of streamlining we should have seen, if I'm being harsh, 3-4 years ago. That should have been in the game for a long time. I'm glad they're adding that to the game.
Yeah.
My big concern with all of this, more than anything, just talking as a loot person first and foremost, when I get a weapon and I want to review that weapon, I will do my best to be impartial about it. I'll talk about its roles, its perks, its origin trait, its recoil direction, its handling, its, you know, all the various stats and how it fares in terms of a build too. But the overwhelming trend in the comment section of my videos is it better than X? Is it better than this thing I already have? Is this better than what I'm already using? And I think the biggest one I saw this for was Kvostov and Necrochasm. Like, the people couldn't decide which one to use. They were just like, oh, I'm going to use Kvostov because it has orb generation. And I'm out here trying to explain that, no, use Necrochasm because it's more fun than Kvostov. Sorry, the personal opinion. One for Thrall is crazy. But then you have Kvostov, which just supercharges your builds, and that's just sort of one of the best guns in the game. And it was at the time. And I think people look at loot in a very sort of absolutist way, where it's like, You only have this one thing, and it has to be the best thing. Otherwise, it's not worth chasing. And it's not anybody's fault, I don't think. I think it's just the way the communities develop their own voice around this sort of conversation where if it's not S tier, then it's not worth using. And on some levels, I can respect that. On another level, I think it's a bit tragic because sort of all the hard work that the weapons team puts into these weapons gets lost in favor of, oh, this has the max range, this has adept mods, this has this, the other. Plus, you know, the whole thing with vault space and people being hoarders and people needing to decide what to have. So that's another factor too. So with respect to all of this is all fine, but it's still more Destiny. It's still more, oh, here's a super enhanced. Here's a super enhanced role, this tier 5 thing with 5 enhanced perks. Great. But we already know the enhanced perks are only marginally better than the standard perks in 99.9% of the roles out there.
Yeah.
Like the enhanced perks do not fundamentally make a huge difference. And that is by design because they didn't want people to feel left out.
Yep.
Like if there was a 10% difference between enhanced kill clip and normal kill clip, great. But I think the actual difference is like 2 or 3%. So I'm not excited about that. From a loot perspective, I'm not excited to ramp it up to master difficulty and then get all the same weapons, but now they're extra gold and extra shiny. I want to see a completely this is just me and my fantasy wish list because we're just talking for the sake of talking. I want to see a completely different approach to guns. What if we brought back like the Destiny 1 system where the gun got better the more you used it?
Yeah.
What about that? Or certain types of weapons, like if you had an adept version of a weapon, what if that had very specific roles that were dedicated to bringing out the best of that weapon in a specific activity?
Yep.
You know, my God, instead of just being
you're speaking
the same role but like 0.3% better.
Yeah, like I know that there's a lot of times when the Bungie weapons team absolutely knocks it out of the park with regards to a new exotic that has a new mechanic. I think they need to sit there and continue to look outside the box and take those approaches and to apply them to a bunch of other weapons. Like, it's one thing to sit there and be like, okay, so this is Ruinous Effigy. It's a laser beam, but when you shoot people with it, it turns into a ball, and you can guard with the ball, or you can dunk the ball, or you can smack people around with the ball. It's a whole other weapon that comes from this weapon. You can beat a motherfucker with another motherfucker, you know? Cool internal mechanics. That's the kind of level of crazy that Bungie is able to pull off with weapons. But they need to do that with bigger systems across the entirety of the game. Like, it needs to be this case of, okay, so we're trying out this new weapon archetype, and it's not just like a rocket sidearm where it's, you know, a big flat damage boost in your special slot. It does a weird new thing. I don't think that it's necessarily something like, hey, we need to go back to the time of glaives, because I don't know if that's necessarily the answer. But at very least, when it came to glaive, it was a genuine experimentation. Like, they do a lot of stuff. So
that was exciting.
Yeah, it was an exciting time because it's like what a weapon can be is redefined. So I think they need to do some stuff. And, you know, there's some obvious stuff that you can pull from across gaming. We've never seen akimbo weapons in Destiny. We've never seen a whole bunch of stuff in between. But, like, yeah, I make something fundamentally different and apply it to a huge swath of what the game does. And then you're looking at something that might apply to like Destiny 3 levels of territory. Sure. You know what I mean?
And that's sort of my point too, is like if you introduce more weapons that all kill, great. You have more options to kill things that are killing things, maybe slightly better than previous stuff killed things. And I think for a lot of people, you know, they might be clearing the raid with a dire promise from Shadowkeep, you know? I've definitely seen some weird stuff in LFG being used from years ago, and guess what? They were doing just fine. The game is not necessarily scaling to this great place where you need the newest stuff in order to complete the game, which is great for accessibility and for lapsed players and everything else, but also keeps the gameplay experience stagnant. So it's partially a weapon rewards innovation system issue. It's partially a builds issue where everything is so ability spammy that you could just look at an enemy at this point and you could clear a room. You know, it's getting to that level.
Yeah.
It's a game-wide issue where we're not sure what we're doing with these weapons. We're just creating variants for the sake of variants, filling in holes in the oh, do we have a void rapid fire auto rifle this season? No? Okay, let's put that in there.
Yeah.
You know?
I think, okay, you guys have so many points I want to touch on, and I'm going to try to remember all of them. I think first of all, if they're able to somehow incorporate this kind of elevated endgame content loop where maybe they introduce leaderboards of like the highest scoring, get people invested in like wanting to one up other people or, you know, compete against their friends. A higher tier of raids, like, God, Destiny has been crying for that forever. And I don't just mean Master with like champion spam or whatever. Like how Pantheon was, where they add mechanics and they change it and it's actually difficult. Like that's probably the best received activity they've put in this game in a very, very long time. And people are begging for it to come back. I did not see mention of that today, which made me sad. Because that is one of the best experiences I've ever had in this game. So if they can figure out a way to pair this with making weapons meaningful again, where it's not just ability spam 24/7, where it's not just me going and crafting enhanced perks on every weapon that's a raid weapon, whatever. I think they've recently done a much better job of balancing that. Like, for example, onslaught weapons were not craftable. You know, things of that nature, whereas like the seasonal ones are. The dungeon weapons are not craftable. Like, I think they're finding a better balance there, and I hope they lean into that a lot more, because if they can make these enhanced perks more powerful, because not everything is craftable, and maybe craftable weapons can no longer get enhanced perks. I personally think that's how that should be. Enhanced perks should be reserved for endgame weapons that you go and you work for, you chase down a role, you invest in the weapon, you level it up to this tier 5, whatever, and then they can make those enhanced perks much more ambitious and like actually make them, instead of kill clip being an additional 0.2% time to kill, you know what I mean? Like, it just does nothing for the gun. You can't even, there's no power fantasy there. So if they can then make these more powerful to compete with abilities, and then it cycles back into this where like we have a reason to go back and actually take these leveled up weapons into harder content, and we kind of need those better perks and things to like actually, you know, clear them efficiently or clear them better. Like, I feel like that's one element of Destiny that is missing so much, is we try and min-max all these builds, and we, you know, we meta define all these weapons. Like you said, is it better than the thing before it? No, not going to use it. Like, it just renders so much loot irrelevant, which is really sad, because like I do think on a counterpoint to some of the things that were said, Bungie somehow finds ways to continue to make perks that are relatively interesting for endgame PvE.
Yeah.
Whether it's reconstruction or bait and switch, explosive light, reworking exotic perks, ergo some, you know, taking on catalysts of other or perks of other weapons, and, you know, being able to like totally shift the meta, like perfect fifth on a sword. Who saw that coming? Like, no one did. So if they can take these three elements and somehow find a better balance there, I feel like it would be such a major step forward for the game. And that's kind of my hope, because right now it just feels so imbalanced with ability power spam, and the sandbox is so full and of weapons now. Like, hopefully this tier 5 new weapon system is sort of a soft reset and gives you a reason to use these over the weapons that we currently have now, because Pursuit in Destiny's just kind of been dead for a while, outside of like there's maybe 1 to 2 weapons per expansion where you're like, oh, I need to go get that, and then once you have it and craft it, like, you're just done with the chase.
Well, it's because the gameplay's been solved. Like, the gameplay itself has been solved. There's only so many different ways to kill an enemy.
It's true.
100%.
That's true.
It perhaps speaks to the need, and this is hard to do because, I mean, God, how much deeper can you really go to a certain extent? It speaks, I think, to a need for more depth with regards to the actual possibilities of how you can do stuff within Destiny. And that sounds very vague, but to put it really simply, a lot of the stuff to do with Destiny being a first-person shooter means that lots of the stuff revolves around it being a first-person shooter, and is your gun doing enough damage, right? We need to expand out more with regards to roles. It's why I really am encouraged to see things like No Hesitation, where it's like, hey, this is a novel kind of weapon. You can shoot and heal someone with your gun. Yeah. Now imagine if instead it was an ARC version of it and you could amplify people, and there was a need for that increased level of speed in the game and that increased level of handling. You know, imagine instead if it's to do with Woven Mail and there's something to do with mechanics with Strand. I don't know. Like, give us things that expand what you can do in the sandbox to encourage different responses to encounters.
I like that.
Perfect example I just want to throw in there. The healing auto rifle from the Pale Heart.
Yeah.
Absolutely useless outside of master raids.
Pretty much, but at least it
Like,
has
nothing
a
is gonna kill
niche
you.
place. I mean, that's true. That is true. You do throw
But
on speaker's
like,
sight, and it's like,
I would love to have just what if you did a 3-person strike and that was a legitimate strategy to kill someone, it's to
Exactly.
heal.
Yeah. The game needs to have these new options, but it also needs to have different kind of mechanics that are rebalanced for this. Because yeah, Destiny is a first-person shooter first, and I absolutely understand the appeal of that. That's great. But I think we might have got to the point where we've matured, where it's okay for it to be a little bit more than just a typical FPS in the way that it's been for so many years. Like,
yeah,
let's expand that, you know, because I don't know what circumstances right now I could use an arc iteration of No Hesitation for to give people amplified as a buff if that were a thing. And again, that's a whole load, like throwing things out there on a weird, like, you know, tangent. But realistically, I'd love to sit there and see a game where there is a good reason to hunt down that specific archetype of weapon, because it does have a place, because there is a purpose for it, because there is a build that does more than just doing a lot of damage or clearing ads really fast, where I can sit there and say there is a competent reason for me to functionally be a part of my team. It's entirely possible that also means the entire sandbox needs to be rebalanced, but like if we're talking about things for a D3, if we're talking about things to keep the game alive and to keep it fresh and to make stuff meaningful, then yeah, this stuff should at least be on the table.
yeah. And I think, not to go back on these points that we've been kind of belaboring like crazy, but I would love to see endgame cosmetics from like really difficult content, and like have that be reflective. It is the big first of all, people will say they'll never do it because they won't make money on it or they won't sell skins in Eververse. I understand that, and I get that. There is place for both. And if they like release timely skins, like if they had released a Starfire ornament when Starfire was crazy, they could have funded an entire exotic mission. I don't care what anybody says, but they were super late to the party on that. They were super late to the party on Hoyle. Like,
Wood.
Easily. And there is so much room for legendary skins, kind of like they've done with Recluse in the past, or with spare rations that you could earn from raids or dungeons, or like, you know, the higher tiers of GMs. Like, people that sort of cosmetic chase is what keeps people playing World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy and all these other games that have like insane player retention, because there's multiple tiers of difficulty and cosmetic rewards that don't give you any benefit in terms of play. It's an even playing field, but keeps you wanting to chase something like that looks really cool and shows how invested you are in the universe. So I would love to see that reflected. All right. We're taking a breaking point here. So these are screenshots from the presentation today, kind of looking forward. It's concept art, looking forward towards, I guess, what did they call it? It is Apollo, or possibly even Behemoth. And I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts on what this could potentially be, if Byf, maybe, like if you have any like lore references that you're able to draw from these images potentially, or if this is kind of like uncharted territory for both of you guys.
I don't know if you have anything to say, Nomad, but go right ahead if you do.
I mean, I'm like, emotionally, these images feel alien, distant, they feel otherworldly, extraterrestrial, and yet you've got a very, very iconic piece of Earth's history and anthropological like establishment in that naval ship there. It's a very cool blending of the worlds. It's, you know, like it makes me want to understand what happened here. How did this happen? And I know that, you know, they're not afraid to play around with, you know, old Earth iconography and old Earth imagery in future landscapes. And I know that's nothing new to Destiny, but this particular, I think it's because the alien elements feel so alien, like something we've never really seen before. I think that's what's throwing me off a little bit. I'm getting sort of like Arrival vibes from this. I can't put my hand on this. I can't put my finger on this.
It's the weird floating vases. They've got the similar kind of shape and vibe to it, really.
Does this look underwater to you? Or does it look like it was an ocean bed and is now completely dried out, which would be even more interesting?
Yeah. I think that's definitely the case. As far as the vases themselves, I literally can't give commentary because I have no clue. But what I would say is that, at very least, the aesthetic and even the symbology on the side of it, it is not saying Clovis Bray, of course, but it has that same kind of vibe, you know, very clean, clinical white lines, even down to the way that the logo's sort of imagery is put out there. This looks like a new age of Clovis Bray or something along those lines that, you know, rings with some kind of iconography of the Golden Age. And similarly, in the new cutscene, sorry, not cutscene, well, in the new image you're showing off here, it's you know, it's showing that contrast. You have old that's set against new, and maybe Frontiers is playing with the idea of us trying to reestablish our old colonies. So, I mean, in this instance in particular, I think you see, if you look over to the left and ignore the big spaceships, those look like either a bunch of crates or maybe even, it's a bit hard to see, might be some kind of truck there in the kind of middle. Maybe that's just a bunch of crates.
Yeah, I see what you're talking about.
Yeah, that kind of thing. It's weird because it is a concept, and these are older crashed Golden Age ships most likely, but yeah,
it looks like
it's a hard one to really tell. Yeah, it's just one of those moments of there is no reference we have that immediately squares with all of this. There are a bunch of possibilities of where stuff like this could be, but ultimately I think it does tell us we're at least getting new locations and new destinations, and we're trying to push back into what was once a place that belonged to humanity. But aside from that, not much more that can really be said for this. I will say there are some big ticket locations in Destiny that have been talked about for a while, but have never been explored in a Destiny game or in any of its other media. Not that there's been much of that. You know, whenever talking about it, you know, old Chicago and the swamps there always comes up. You could be looking at places that are a little bit further afield and less mentioned, like the Mumbai Push. And then you could be looking out into other parts of the solar system, which is what I think we're seeing here with moons like Ganymede, which are ripe for possibility but have never been explored.
And it
This
looks
couldn't
like
be Lubre, right? Because Lubre was destroyed.
So yes, destroyed, but also it's not clear the total extent to which there may be any remains to it. There was that note of the Vanguard sending out a probe to Lubre, wasn't there?
That's what this could be.
Which looks very similar to this.
And you do have the destroyed stuff in the background. We've never seen an image of what Lubre looks like. We only have descriptions here. I think that Lubre is potentially a thing, but it's also just like, it's hard to tell when you don't have two suns in the sky necessarily. And there's a bunch of stuff to do with the way that Lubre is described, but not impossible, you know. The floating stuff and the debris in the background, though, makes me think that there may have been some intervention with a bigger power. We see stuff like this on Nessus because the Leviathan was literally eating Nessus. So who knows where this could be? There's a bunch of things, but got to have some kind of human influence. That's the one thing tying us together.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like you said, there's very human elements to it. It looks like this one almost seems like there was like some sort of effort to come and repair, and these like drones, or I'm not sure what these are. These ones look much more like worn down and destroyed. Like this was maybe at the depth of an area that maybe that wasn't successful. Whereas in this image, they're in much better condition. This side on the right side of the image looks like they're building something, like there's actually something under construction and being rebuilt. So I don't know. I'm very interested to see what direction they go with this for sure. You know, and maybe some of those frontiers are like completely abandoned wastelands, and some are, you know, ones that we can actually rebuild potentially. And that would be, I mean, I'd be interested in a story like that. That does actually sound pretty entertaining. And you know, Robert Brooks, who previously worked as the narrative lead at Bungie, tweeted, y'all are going to lose your minds when you find out what this is. This is what I was working on right before the light offs, and it's honestly a cool ass story. So I don't know. I'm excited.
I want to go ahead and throw some context out here, because when Rob sits there and talks about a cool ass story, he really does mean it. This man is responsible for some of the stuff that's really celebrated in Destiny's narratives. Yep. Like a lot of the important stuff that happens in Final Shape. Like, yeah, there's a lot of people that touched a bunch of different points to it, but you know, to give you an idea, this is the man who is partially responsible for crafting a bunch of Crow's entire arc. So if you were at any point sort of shocked, or you had that kind of moment where you were like, oh yeah, this particular moment, this arc with the moment where Zavala came along and was saved by Crow, for example. Like, those are moments that have at least in part been crafted by Rob.
Right.
So, yeah, when he says you're going to lose your minds, it may be one of those things where it's particularly aimed at story nerds like me, but as a general point, it will probably be a moment where it's worth taking a look at things.
Yeah.
And I'll say this too, like, this is the vibe I'm getting from the narrative team generally, you know, like former members of the narrative team who have come along and talked about what's coming up the pipeline and what will be happening in the future. Not a single one of them has sat there and said, well, story's going to be ass now. You guys are in trouble. Like, no, they have all sat there and been like, it sucks that I'm no longer working at Bungie. It is painful that I was fired. It is horrifying that I have to go through all this life change. It is irritating, to say the very least, in some cases. But every single one of them that has talked about the future of Destiny's narrative has talked about, I'm really excited for you guys to see it. Which, you know,
true.
in all of the gloom, it's actually a really cool thing to hear. Like, they're still excited for the story, even though they're no longer able to work on it.
I mean,
which is like,
I'm very
in the vibe that we get. Do you like, that's weird, right?
It
like,
is.
in a
it
good
is.
way.
And I mean, honestly, it's the thing that has me the most excited, because like, I'm very much focused. Like, I am that endgame metagame type player where like I chase what's relevant to the game and like focusing on the next day one raid. You know, I help people with endgame content, things like that. So like I focus on more so like, you know, completing endgame activities and helping people through the new raid and, you know, getting ready for the day one raid race and things like that. And oddly enough, it's the weapon updates and the more known quantities that like don't have me as excited. Like, I am still excited for them, but the mystery of Destiny is always the main appeal to this franchise. And I hope they dive into that more, because like this here, all new destination, we have no idea where we are. Like, if they can lead more into the mystery of like, we're going into a completely unknown future of like exploration for Guardians and, you know, gamers alike. Like, we have no idea where we're going. That's what gets me the most excited. Like, I get stoked just like hearing things like this from developers. It's so sad that he's not a part of it anymore. But like, I'm not even a huge story person, and like it has me amped up to like want to dive in and see what this is all about. So I mean, I don't know. I have no doubt it'll deliver. Any other theories on what this could be, or are we good to move past?
Just trying to think of, I mean, there's a few planets out there, or not planets, planetoids, moons, more often than not, which, I mean, for the ship one at very least, are indicative of the fact that there could be a sea out there. Or there was at one point.
Ship, is it? There could be some timey-wimey things happening, temporal displacement and whatnot.
Something like that. But so here's the interesting thing about it. Like, technology within the Golden Age has this very weird jump, you know? So we have faster, not a lot faster, rather near light speed technology, near light speed drives within our ships, which were around during the Golden Age. And like, you know, there was a lot of advanced tech. They got SIVA working in the Golden Age. They built cities with the snaps of fingers practically. But you also had old, rusted Golden Age cars, which are literally the same as today. There's a very unequal expansion of tech within Destiny's universe. And so when you sit there and see an old ship like that within the universe, it's not inconsistent for it to be somewhere other than Earth, right? Like, if you look at Titan, there's a lot of structures that would not look out of place in a modern Earth oil rig, you know? Like, the rigs that we explore there's not too much that's crazy technologically advanced about them. They're huge, but it really is just like climbing over an oil rig for the most part. And look down into the sea every once in a while and look what's docked to it. Like, you're not sitting there seeing super advanced skimmers or anything. A lot of it is just the rafts and things that you're looking at.
Which begs the question then, if this was a colonization effort or expedition gone wrong, why would there be a Golden Age ship there?
Which is one thing about maybe Frontiers is about reclaiming stuff, right? You know, like, this stuff might be from two different eras, which is why I wonder where in the system there would have been oceans and where it might have been potentially terraformed by the Traveler and might have decayed into something. You know, there's a few places where water might be prominent within the system. In particular, I think Callisto is the other really big one that comes to mind, but that's an entire ice moon. So who knows what that looks like. Point being, it's not impossible that we go and see something a little bit more outlandish, and this is all about like, hey, reclaim the heritage of your past and, you know, find a way for humanity to grow and prosper again.
Mm-hmm. We, you know, it kind of reminds me, I'm not sure if either of you have seen the show Foundation on Apple TV. It has very similar vibes to like kind of the storyline of that, where they have this main metropolis of civilization and, you know, all that, but a lot of the story revolves around going to these outer reaches of the universe and the known like places that they've been able to travel, and holding these outposts and developing society there. So it seems like it could be like something kind of similar, like whether it's, you know, maybe there's a threat that gets alerted on, you know, a super distant part of the universe, and we have to, you know, go and help protect and or, you know, like you said, like maybe there's like an ancient call or something from the golden age or before, where we get alerted and have to go explore. So I don't know, there's so much potential for the story with this. This has me the most excited by far.
Maybe that's Brand's planet.
What'd you say, Nomad? Sorry.
Whose planet?
Brand's planet. Any Interstellar fans out here?
Oh, it is. Yeah. Time moves.
Sat there and I was still in Destiny brain. I was like, who the hell is Brand?
Oh my god.
I will say one last thing, which is something I hadn't considered until just a moment now when I was looking at it, which is humanity does have another alliance with another power out there, which is Neomuna, which, you know, needless to say, very technologically advanced, has a ton of stuff. The iconography on the side of those blips, or whatever they are, it could be referential to Neomuna generally, and if you're looking to retake and recolonize the stars, it's a thing that all of humanity is going to be interested in, not just humanity on Earth, which, you know, that's important because we often forget about Neomuna because Lightfall was Lightfall. But yeah, they are a huge part of humanity now that has been reunited with us, and there are efforts for the two entities to work closer together. The Last City is no longer the Last City, and I think we don't remember that enough.
That's a really good point. It's very interesting. Yeah, the iconography on those it's interesting because it to me it does scream like very Clovis, like Braytech type. I don't know, like symbolism, but yeah, I mean, it could very well be Neomuna or something we've never even seen before. So, okay. What was one thing you guys were hoping to see in the blog post today that didn't get addressed by Bungie? And I know we've touched on this a little bit, but if there's anything in particular that still stands out to you, I'd be interested in hearing what that is, starting with Nomad.
Come back to me, I'm thinking.
Okay. Byf, do you have anything that jumps out?
Yeah, I know they touched on a little bit, but I really hoped that they would do a very active note about new players and onboarding and how they were going to address that. Because, again, I said it before, but it's very clear that we need new blood in this franchise. And if we are going to succeed in any manner, that is the way we do it. We can't just sit there and rely on old players. And yes, Nomad has brought up the excellent points earlier of like, hey, perception, the only really good way to do that is to slap a 3 on the box. Like, those are all very, very valid points. Absolutely fantastic to bring them up too, because this is the time. But yeah, I would have loved to sit there and at least hear that there is an active plan on the larger base of, yeah, we're trying to make the story more approachable. And like, don't get me wrong, that's really good. It's just, I think there really is a need right now for an active plan to bring players back. And an active plan to bring new players in.
I would have loved that too, with kind of like the segue into a new saga as well, like, and have that be heavily marketed of like,
yes,
we're completely revamping it, and this is a fresh start for players who have wanted to get into the game and haven't had the chance or been overwhelmed. Like, God, that would have been the perfect time. Like, as we go to explore the stars, like, enjoy our newly revamped new player onboarding system, caught up at power level, blah blah blah. Like, oh my God, would have been so good. I think for me, one, I think I would like more clarification on how many raids per year they plan to release, whether it's, because if they're reducing down to 1 a year, it does sound like a lot of the seasonal content is now free, if I read that correctly, but it's that if it really is 1 raid and 1 dungeon a year, 1 per each of the 2 major expansions, that's much less value than we're currently getting with the same kind of yearly model. And two, I want to see the 3.0 subclasses like revisited or somehow to make build crafting more diverse again. And three, I think it would be an announcement of Pantheon returning or something of that nature, because I loved that era of Destiny. Like, that's probably the best activity, in my opinion, they've ever brought into the game. It was like that true end game that like even experienced teams did struggle with, and I don't think we've had that level of challenge. And for the most part, it was so well received by so many players because it had cosmetics tied behind it, a unique title. It was hard. It really pushed your builds to the limits. It required communication. The mechanics were actually changed for the bosses, which we've been asking for forever after master raids have been kind of littered with just champion spam for so long. I would love to see more details on those things specifically. Nomad, have you come to anything just yet or not yet?
Yeah. But I feel like your two answers are going to be better than mine. I haven't played since middle of Act 1. I haven't logged in since middle of Act 1.
Oh.
And I've never taken this extended a break from Destiny ever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my last video was July 19th. I haven't uploaded in 2 months. And I know people who know me will be like, "Oh, only 2 months, ha 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 ha," and fair enough. But I think I know I wasn't going to get it because of the everything that happened around Bungie and the timing of everything. But what I probably, if I had to hope for anything, not that I did, but if I had to hope for something, it would probably be a reason to care again.
Yeah.
And I didn't get it, but that's as much as my problem as it is Bungie's, you know?
Do you think that's
So
fatigue or more like a sense of apathy because there's nothing of significance to look forward to for you? Like, is that, or is it kind of a mixture of both?
Not knowing where the story's going, not having something concrete. The biggest thing that would have hyped me back up would have been maybe like a 30 to 60 second teaser uploaded to YouTube, which is like just showing off the language of the new world. Sort of like what they did with Marathon, like the announcement for that.
Yeah.
There's nothing to it really, but it's the art style and the music and the editing and the world. You just get hints of what could be, and it hyped people to no end. Even though what that was may have significantly changed since then. But yeah, it's mostly just a reason to care. And I don't have a reason to care because it's what we have seen is a streamlined version of the same game.
Yep. Dude, that just immediately brings, oh my god,
I'm so
I would
sorry.
be so hyped. No, it just brings, like, I can immediately imagine like Ikora coming over the radio and being like, "We've received a distress call from the outer corners of civilization," and then like they show this concept art and it's like, you know, we need to send you there to explore, you know, never before seen territories. Like, people would be so hyped about that, even for like a 30-second
even
trailer.
If it showed nothing, if it showed, it could have been just a ball of ether floating in the sky, and that would have done something.
That's true.
I think there is one thing to pick up on there, and I touched on this at the very beginning, but yeah, fundamentally, if people are going to get excited for a game, including a live service especially, because this is a thing where you are persistently moving forward, people, it's not just about a gun to chase anymore. Like, yeah, some people are here for that, but like, I think there's an overwhelming number of people who want to know that there is a threat that they can point that gun at. Like, if you don't have a reason to be in the universe anymore, if there is no story driving things forward, then
True.
yeah, there's no point. And here's the thing too. In a perfect world, I don't think it needs to be a grand villain or threat for Destiny. Like, sure, you love the whole thing of like Helldivers 2 sitting there and just being like, people sat there and pointed the bugs and were like, "Hey, go kill a ton of them," and everyone was like, "Yeah, let's do it," at the very beginning of that game's life cycle.
Yep.
But like, we've got to remember that the Empyrean Foundation was a thing, and Stonks became a meme for like an entire month, and it was hilarious and fantastic.
Yeah,
like we can't do that nowadays because the hype isn't there, and there isn't enough care for everything else that's going on around the world and everything else, and it needs to be almost ungamified. It needs to be sort of removed to this point where it is just something that's done purely on sentiment, and it's something that players do organically as opposed to something that is forced artificially as a community event. But like, there can be bigger stories about doing stuff in Destiny and building things through and making it so that the world feels more alive. And it doesn't need to be something that comes along from a community event. It can just be something where it's like, hey, there was genuinely a thing where you could quietly help rebuild the Elixir Quarter, and it wasn't something tied to a community event. Instead, it was just like, did you notice it's been growing over time? Like,
Yeah.
And it happens specifically when you dunk in this thing. And, you know, yeah, it shaves like 10% off the top of the engrams you get, but if you dunk in this specific one and give it to Mithrax instead of the spider, like it's helping build their stuff. Like casual things like that maybe work in the favor of building the world, and then do those writ large, you know? Because if we genuinely did have to, how much would you donate to rebuild your old tower?
Oh my god! Could you imagine?
Because I don't know about you, but like, yeah, it's not the only example, but stuff like that, you know, it's going to sit there and it's going to resonate with people, even if it's not necessarily tied in with killing an enemy. Like, if you dedicated a season to having us rebuild the tower and saw the actual effort of it built in front of our eyes, and you felt the weight of that. I feel like that's just one example, but Destiny, I think, needs to be at a point where the story is definitely reaching for strong villains, but is also reaching beyond them too. Yeah. To things that just make the universe alive.
It's a great segue, actually, because I mean, the next question was, and we've touched on this quite a bit, can these problems be solved in D2, or do you guys feel like a Destiny 3 is needed? Is that realistic? Because to me, like, I think one of the major points that, and you just touched on it, Byf, was like that I find bizarre is we're in this universe where we've won. Like, we have all these conflicting timelines where, like, we're enemies with the Cabal, but we're also allies with the Cabal. We, you know, there's still darkness influence, but the Witness is dead, and there's like all the, I don't know. There's just there's so, I mean, and that's just the natural reality of like a live service game over, you know, what has D2 been around for 7 years now. But I like a total tonal shift and reset in a D3 would be very welcome. I think like a loot reset. I know people will get so mad at me for saying this, but I feel like a loot reset is so desperately needed. I don't know how you address the power creep of Prismatic on its own, like combining the best elements of all the other 3.0 subclasses. I don't know how you address that without pissing people off with nerfs, or how you piss people, like doing, you know, managing the weapon stuff without pissing people off with sunsetting again, which they're never going to do again because they've just brought them all back. Like, there's just
piss people off regardless.
There's so many core issues though that, like, I feel like is because D2 has been around for so long, and you know, unless they somehow innovate, like with maybe it is those tier 5 weapon reworks and like these additional difficulties, and you know, I don't know, like maybe if you use Prismatic you get reduced score or whatever, I don't know, but it just those are such complex issues to solve in the current title, much less, you know, like you guys already mentioned so many times, like the hype factor alone of a third title in the series would bring in so many new players. They could have a total reset of you know, a brand new saga, brand new start. They could have, you know, revamp the new player system and actually have a proper new light introduction to the franchise. Like, I don't know, it's just such a difficult thing to solve. I don't know whoever wants to chime in on this, but
sure,
yeah, go ahead, Nomad.
Like, I think we can all, we've talked a lot about Destiny 3, but we've read the Jason Schreier articles, the Bloomberg articles, we've read the leaks, we read all the sources from different people. Operation Payback supposedly was supposed to be something to do with a sequel or a new adventure, but it never got anywhere. Destiny 3 is not in development. So we do have to acknowledge that if there were to be a Destiny 3, if they decided today that Destiny 3 was going to happen, we'd be looking at a sequel in maybe 5 years.
It would be like 2028, yeah, like something like that.
Yeah, and at that point, it would have to be a response to whatever the game state is in 2028, which none of us here today in 2020 could have predicted Prismatic today. So it's a bit of a weird question to ask. Like, does the franchise need Destiny 3? Because the only question that is answering Destiny 3 is apathy, the question of apathy. Mm-hmm. People are burnt out by Destiny 2. People have run their course with Destiny 2. The story has run its course with Destiny 2. Mm-hmm. The biggest problem Destiny 2 faces now is not the game itself. It's not, I mean, we can talk about the minutiae of rewards and weapons and loot and activities and all that. But the real thing is, people don't care. The story has run its course. So, what is the problem here? The problem here is that people have stopped caring. How do you solve that problem? Is it a new weapon role? No, because that's still more of the same. Is it new activities? Not really. Not entirely. The gameplay experience fundamentally needs to change. The way the game interacts with you needs to change. The way the story is experienced needs to change. They seem to understand that because Alison Lur, is that her name? Alison from the narrative team.
Yes.
Yes.
She said we're going to do a non-linear story, and I think that is exactly what Destiny needs because it's something that's different and it's something that gets the player to think about the game a little bit more. And we may very well see a campaign that's much more lock and key rather than shoot to win, which I think would be really, really, really good. But anyways, going back to the larger point, how do you solve the problem of people not caring? And the answer is to build something that they are not familiar with, so that there may be a chance that they come into it and really enjoy their experience. Now, obviously, it goes without saying, make it good. Otherwise, you will really cause people to fall off even more. It's like, oh, they tried this new thing. Let's have a look. It's bad? Okay, well, then that's Destiny 2 done. If Destiny 3 is not a realistic goal, then they need to change pretty much everything within Destiny 2 for people to care again. Whether that's creating a new multiverse saga or a multi-year saga, whether that's creating activities like Into the Light, like Onslaught, creating incredible raids that are somehow accessible yet satisfy the endgame user as well, or doing something to galvanize the community, like Byf's suggestion of rebuilding the tower. What if there was a narrative? What if there's a way to incorporate narrative into the improvement of the game? Imagine if you had a whole season where you had the story where you're helping Shaxx design the next Crucible, the next version of the Crucible. That would be dope. That's a way to get people to care again. It's creating narrative arcs, creating story-based reasons for people to log in and experience something that they otherwise wouldn't see again. Because Final Shape was the pinnacle of go here, kill a bunch of things, get the result. Yeah. That's the linearity of the gameplay loop that we've had so far. We can't have that anymore. We cannot, because the people who are sticking around are sticking around. The people who have left are not coming back. If that is the continuation of things that we're going to experience moving forward.
There's a couple of things that I want to dive into on that, actually, that I think are super interesting. One, shout out to the PvP community. You guys have put up with so much for so long, and you guys deserve equally the same amount of like overhauls and changes and rejoice that PvE players do. Because I did see that mentioned in chat, so I just wanted to bring that up. I have this feeling that like Bungie's leadership was kind of stuck in two minds. Do we expand into Marathon and another new IP? We're working on a mobile game. You know, do we do Destiny 2? Do we kind of consolidate everything back into do we go into D3? Do we consolidate into D2 and bring D1 elements forward and drop the 2? And it just feels like they got kind of lost along the way and split on what they wanted to do, and ultimately kind of ended up not doing what they needed to do, which in my opinion was, you know, back in Witch Queen, start deving D3 and start pushing, you know, the franchise forward, knowing for damn certain that this Light and Dark saga was coming to an end and that you were going to have a massive problem trying to keep players invested after this main story arc came to an end. And you knew that there were pressure points with sunsetting, and you knew that there were pressure points with power creep and weapon crafting and all these other decisions that have kind of like led to players to just be disinterested in where the game is right now, because you have so many tools at your disposal. There's so much new loot, not that much of it matters. I don't know, it feels like the resources weren't put in the right places, sadly. And, you know, now with all the layoffs, it's like, do they even have the ability to develop a D3 alongside running a live service game? I feel like that's a huge doubt from me personally, but I don't know. It's a mess.
I think that there's a fundamental truth to all of this, which is, yeah, the whole thing of many gambles being made at the studio has definitely led to this point where the chance for a D3 has been squandered. And it is mad to me that there wasn't this chance that was pounced upon by leadership of, we're finishing our major saga, let's start a new one and make sure that the episodes are something that everyone tunes in for, because it's the prep, it's the preamble, it's the prelude to this next thing.
Exactly.
It is wild to me that we didn't, like, and obviously, you know, it's very easy to say these things in the vacuum, not knowing the reality of what's going on in the studio. And there's also a ton of practical issues that would need to be solved by a D3 and by a sequel when it comes to all of that. But like, it's wild to me that we didn't see that as the opportunity. You know, you want to keep something going, you just finished the big saga and you did it with rave reviews. If D3 had been announced in the place of the first reveal of Frontiers in the episodes, if it had been D3 instead of Destiny 2 Frontiers, I think the narrative would be completely different.
People would be so hyped, dude. They're always just looking forward. It'd be insane. It would be insane.
Like it's, you know, again, it's so easy to sit there and say this with hindsight, and that doesn't necessarily mean it would have been the right call either, because there's no way for us to know now. But the thing that I absolutely think we can all agree on, which was the terrible gamble, was the idea that all of a sudden Bungie's leadership should have been content with, first of all, decreasing the size of the D2 team and then funneling all of that into not one, not two, but 5 incubation projects and spending money on a new studio, like set of offices in Bellevue that they then had to basically torch the project for. And it's just, you know, all of this waste, all of this money just lost. And it's like Destiny 2 was funding all of it. And there was no, like, Frontiers is you know, now our answer to all of this. And we could have had Payback, and if like that had been the thing that had kept on going, and if that was the next answer, yeah, sure, we could have seen that too, and that might have been fine as well. Like, for what it's worth, even though people have question marks over it, there's not a single Bungie dev that I've spoken to that speaks badly about what Payback would have been. What I will say though is this: it's none of the other stuff has panned out except maybe Marathon, and Marathon is a question mark right now, and the waste is the reason we're here in the first place and why we're not able to contemplate it. It's just, it's infuriating to the extreme. Can D3 solve the franchise's problems if it's done correctly? Maybe. And like, will it bring people back? Will it potentially change perceptions? Yeah, there's a chance for that, for certain. Especially if Bungie is allowed to, I say Bungie, if the devs are allowed to do something good with it and they're allowed to think outside the box, like, yeah, sure, you can see a great game unfold from that. But that does not mean that it's necessarily going to happen, and that it's not a far, far way away.
I don't know
different timeline. That's what we needed, you know.
I don't know how they would do it, but if I was somebody at Bungie, I would be making a plan to release Destiny 3 in 5 years' time.
Yeah,
and
or at least hypothetical, you know.
And in the next 5 years, up until that release, making sure Destiny 2 is the best it could possibly be, so that it'll be a smooth jumping off point to Destiny 3. But that would require a really robust roadmap of all the features that they want to add. If there's going to be a 6th subclass, that's red, because, you know, red subclass, Lamau. You know, what is the story going to pan out? Like, they would have to map. They need a Kevin Feige. They need a Kevin Feige to really map this shit out, both on a technical and a narrative level.
I mean, it's just frustrating to me, like, having worked in marketing and operations at Amazon in, like, kind of a bigger corporate setting, and seeing, like, such an obvious jumping off point for players and not having a plan to capitalize on that, or, like, continue this massive franchise that is solely driving your studio. Let's be very clear about that. Marathon's not out. They don't have any other sources of revenue at the moment. This is it. So, like, all their cards are in on Destiny 2. It's just crazy to me that there was no production plan put in place for that. Or, like, and even if there wasn't a Destiny 3, so they decided to go a different direction, that there wasn't a more robust, like, end to the saga. Here's what we're doing next. Dive into the, like, you know what I mean? It just seems like this empty space that we're floating through. And it's frustrating because it just seems like such obvious mismanagement.
Yeah.
Of what Byf said, like, just resources just being wasted on all these other unproven projects when they have what every studio dreams of, which is probably the most dedicated fan base of any game I've ever played. There are people who strictly watch Destiny, don't play anything else. They will play this game through the best of times, the worst of times. And the fact that you had that for 10 years and we're at this point where like we're at all-time lows, it's so sad to see like how these folks in the studio are getting fired and management continues to go unscathed is just beyond me, because it's fundamental mismanagement of the studio, and it's very, very frustrating to see.
I mean, if I were a corporate man, I would not be firing Pete Parsons publicly. I think I'd be giving him a golden parachute to move on, which is probably what's happening, to be honest.
God, I hope you know, this is very much like hypotheticals and whatnot, but like I really do hope that at very least we can bid Pete farewell. Like, leadership at the studio needs to change, not just for the sake of, you know, getting fresh blood in there and actually having someone who is competent up at the top and can make decisions that don't sabotage the studio, but also I think for the pure fact of perception. Pete is seen as a rot within the studio. The entire executive team is seen as a rot. And it's not just from the standpoint of fans either, who have cottoned onto this ever since the layoffs. Devs in Glassdoor reviews have been complaining about this stuff for ages. They have been talking about for years how management refuses to take any of the words seriously. So it's just, for perception's sake alone, if not for the actual management and running of the day-to-day studio, if Pete leaves, I think that will be a sigh of relief. Legitimately, there are people who I've spoken to who I've sat there and been like, man, I know stuff is bad in Destiny, but what do you reckon would bring people back? And they've legitimately said, I don't know, but I'm not touching that thing until something changes. Like, I've had people say that, you know, I've had people literally swear an F at Pete Parsons' name. Like, who does that? Like, it's such a specific thing, but like, it's an incredible. This is the kind of stuff that was happening with Bobby Kotick back in the days of like Activision Blizzard and everything. Like, oh, it's bad. Like, and then there's all the stuff about how supposedly leadership at Bungie thought that this last round of layoffs went well, and in the meantime, everyone's sitting there and pointing out how at the beginning of 2024, Pete was giving people tours of his garage with his cars. It's like
2 days prior to releasing people, by the way. Like,
holy perception problems. Holy, what the hell? What in the damn hell? Like, I can't even start. It's just, it's insane to me that we're going through this. Like,
and we say this out of a place of love. Like, our frustration and anger is literally because
I mean,
well, not towards him. We say
not
this
towards him, yeah, but for the people who've lost their jobs.
That, like, for them, for the people who are invested in this franchise and are just seeing it get mismanaged into the ground, it's really sad. And the only reason we're this animated is because we care like so much, and it's just, I don't know. There's no game to me that replaces Destiny, and I'm not sure there ever will be, because to be honest, there's a reason there's been no competitor in the space, because it's almost impossible to compete with a game that has the movement and ability and space magic and storytelling and vast, like, just areas to explore. Like, it really is a one-of-a-kind game, and it's just so sad to see that they had this proven quantity and we're here. And we're hopeful for the future that, you know, these 2 mini expansions per year are going to be the answer, and that's kind of what we have to hold on to now, which is, I don't know, it's just a crazy place to be in.
If it wasn't more obvious than it was before, I think the Destiny that we all know and loved is gone. It's done. This whole annual expansion 4-season thing, that cadence is gone. There's new cadence, mid-size expansions, 4 seasons still, funnily enough. It's giving big backlog rotation vibes. Like, it's one of those games you pick up that you never quite finished, and then you're going to play them when you run out of other things to play. Like, this will be the game you play in between major releases from now on.
I hope that's not true,
but
I really do.
But it's just everything they've talked about with this game, everything they've talked about with respect to creating sustainable scale. Like, it seems to me they are moving away from tentpole releases, and they're going to focus more on making it healthier for their dev teams, which is the right thing to do, don't get me wrong, but it is not going to feel like the main character in our lives anymore.
Yep.
I live in some hope. You know, I'm always accused of being an optimist on my video content, and there's a degree to which that's true, because if you don't have hope for anything going on in the game, like, why are you there? Like, I have an immense amount of respect with that in mind of for people who sit there and actively say, you know what, Destiny isn't for me anymore, and they actually put it down. One of my best friends has done that, and you know what? Him and I still talk. It's not as though it's something that I hold against him as a grudge. It's just, hey, if it isn't for you, so be it, and just like let it be. It's the continual pile drive of hate towards something you're still actively engaged with that I don't necessarily get. Critique something all you want, but like, you know, when you genuinely are enjoying something, I respect you a lot more if you then decide to do the thing that is clearly healthier for you mentally, at very least, and just disengage from it. And that's something that will happen with Destiny 2 players. But like, I still live in hope. I've seen them turn it around before, and maybe they'll do it again. But it still doesn't change the fact this is as bleak as it's ever been. And the Frontiers announcement, you know, words only mean so much. We need to see something concrete before I think hope returns properly.
Did you say you don't spend time when there's no point getting a positive experience? Like there's no hope getting a positive experience out of that?
I think, I mean, it's paraphrasing, but yeah. I
so that confirms that Byf does not play Trials of Osiris for a living.
I mean, credit to a lot of Destiny players. They are speaking with their playtime. We're at an all-time low, and this, you know, this will be a quick segue. I know we're running up against time. We're a little over, so we'll make this super fast. But players are playing Black Myth Wukong, First Ascendant, Warframe, you know, Warhammer, Space Marine 40K, like all these games. You've been covering that, Byf, right? Like you've been covering other games. Mactix has gone to Warframe. People are playing all sorts of different titles. You know, I think Clyde like exclusively streams the First Descendant. There's many regular quote-unquote Destiny streamers who haven't touched this game in literally months, other than, you know, when the new exotic mission drops, and that's about it. So hopefully, and I think that was the driving factor behind this blog post, to be completely honest with you, is like their playtime numbers are the lowest they've been ever, literally, on Steam. All-time lows, which is, I mean, and that's coming off the back of, like we said, 6 months of just peak, which is crazy. But that's, I mean, that just goes back to they didn't have a plan, and now all these other games are stepping up and offering, you know, really unique experiences that we, you know, haven't seen before. New in-depth grinds maybe, or, you know, new storylines and universes to explore. And if there's nothing going on in Destiny, that's where they're going to seek their hours now, is sinking their time into those instead. So I'm not sure, like, if Nomad, you said you've been much more focused on school. Is there anything you've been playing like on the side for fun that you've been digging your teeth into?
Everything. I've been playing, so I finally caught up with Jedi Survivor. I played Control for the first time ever, which, by the way, very, very cool game. I've been sort of going back to my personal roots in focusing on story, because I'm going to turn my channel into a video essay channel, I decided, where I analyze and talk about the story behind some of the most revered single-player games of our time. The reason being is because I firmly believe that video games are a medium which can surpass film when it comes to storytelling. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to start celebrating the ones that get close. So
that's cool.
That's sort of my focus right now, is just like playing a bunch of different stuff, coming up with ideas and videos for it. I've been making a bunch of videos that will never see the light of day, just to try and practice like how these videos will look and sound. And I made a couple, and I'm not proud of them, because they just feel a bit too shallow. And I'm very, very, very aware of how competitive and well established the video essay space is. So I haven't really been like committing to anything really so far. Like I'm not going to go back to a live service. I don't think I'm not at that stage of my life where I can dedicate myself to one game. Credit to everybody else who is, though. But yeah, aside from that, PvP wise, played a shit ton of Black Ops 6, really liked it. And I also have been spending a bit too much time in Deadlock.
I've been hearing good things about that. Yeah, I need to play it.
It's very good.
That's awesome. What about you, Byf?
I mean, recently it's been Space Marine 2, but it's definitely a time where I'm expanding, because there is a point to which I have to acknowledge that Destiny has been my bread and butter for 11 years, and there's still a certain sizable amount of people on my channel that like Destiny. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things of I will still continue to make content on this game probably until it ceases to exist. The cadence of that content might change, but at the end of the day, it's not going anywhere. What I will say, and what I'm absolutely still doing, is expanding outwards and looking at further horizons, because I know that my role and my purpose is to be a storyteller. And at the end of the day, Destiny does not have a monopoly on storytelling. That is just the nature of reality.
Yep.
And there are many other verses out there that I can jump into that could use a little bit of unveiling. They could use a little bit of explanation. They could use someone who could potentially give people an in and to show them what's great about those universes. You know, I received a lot of hype on Twitter, and I'm receiving a fair bit of love on YouTube for covering other games. Like, I literally just did my first big 1-hour deep dive into a new property, and I'm going to follow up with other videos because the initial response from earlier today was actually really lovely when I covered Warhammer for the first time. You know, it's not the craziest in terms of viewership, but it's definitely a good response. And every single comment that I've gotten, I have not seen a single person say, don't cover this. Everyone is saying, please do more lore on this. And equally, I've gotten a good response from people who I said I might cover Dragon Age with. And, you know, this just shows me the exciting point of what I can do in the future is just, I'm here to tell people stories and to explore stuff that I think is fascinating and worthy of being talked about, and something that really tells us things. My ideal would be, yeah, sure, it would have been nice to ride an endless Destiny gravy train as a content creator and to have a game that never sees a poor season and always goes from strength to strength. That's not realistic, though. What I want to do now is get to that point where I can tell people stories and they're always fascinated to listen, because I think Nomad is completely correct. Video games are the best medium in this modern era for telling stories, better than movies, better than even a good book. So if people are very happy to see stories, that's what I'm going to do. And Destiny has some of them, but it doesn't have all of them. So yeah, I'm expanding.
Well, if it makes either of you feel better, I swear I can hear them narrate how they get out of bed in the morning, and I would be locked in. So I think you guys are good to expand to whatever.
Well, first of all, I unstick my left. No, I'm kidding.
But I mean,
well,
I say this with like the utmost respect for you both. Like, you're incredible creators, and I have literally zero doubt whatever you guys apply yourselves to, you're gonna find the same success with other games that you found in Destiny, because you guys are truly, like, you really are special creators in that sense of storytelling and getting people invested in why they should care. So I get that. I mean, it's a scary time for everybody that's you know, primarily a Destiny creator, because there's so much unknown and a lot of thought that goes into what game do I associate myself with next. And like, for some people that's multiple games. For another person that might be like one main title that becomes their new main game. And yeah, I wish you guys the best, because I have full faith that you guys will both just absolutely crush it with whatever you guys decide to pursue. So
greatly appreciate you saying that. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Same to you, about. I'm sure you are not at all tethered to this game. You'll find success no matter what you do.
I appreciate you.
Especially with all those guides you don't read.
I don't read any of them. Well, as the PowerPoint begins to break, I just want to conclude our time together by saying, one, here's to hoping Destiny can get on its feet again, and you know, the game we love all stays prevalent in our lives. And two, thank you guys both so much for joining. I know it's a lot of time. It's late over there now. I thought this was a really good discussion. So I appreciate both of your thoughts and insights and being willing to join. For everybody watching the video on YouTube or who's tuned into the stream, if you don't somehow already follow both of them and you somehow follow me, please follow them and watch their content on other games, because I promise you it's going to be so worthwhile with all of the time you put into any other games you guys are looking to explore. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to join.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for having us. It was good to have the discussion.
Awesome. Well, wish you guys the best. Thank you again, and yeah, I appreciate the time. You guys have a great night. All right.
You too.
All right. Thanks, gentlemen. Later.